All right, feel free to follow along in case it's blurry on your end. How archaeologists found the lost city of Troy. I'm just going to get into it. So, Heinrich Schliemann, the German archaeologist, was in Turkey in the late 19th century on a eccentric quest. He was excavating a tell, an artificial mound that covers long abandoned settlements. The site, known as is it his Orlik? Yeah, his Orlik was familiar to only a few specialists. But as Schliemann, Schliemann dug, he was pinning his hopes on finding the ruins of the most famous city in classical literature, Troy. The trouble was that Troy might not even have existed. The acclaimed Greek poet Homer popularized the Trojans and their city in the Iliad and the Odyssey, his 8th century BC epic poems. These works told the story of a 10-year war between Greece and Troy, fought by such timeless characters as Kings Priam and Agamemnon, the warriors brave Hector and mighty Achilles, and the survivors, crafty Odysseus and loyal Aeneas. The poems tell of the bloody battles, fantastic adventures, heroic deeds, and tragic consequences. But was Troy a real place? Schliemann set out to prove it was. And he did. His lyric is now widely accepted as the setting for Homer's epic tales. Studies have revealed that the 100-foot high mound contains not only just one, but 9 Troys, each built over the ruins of the one before. Today, archaeologists consider Troy 6, the sixth county from the bottom up, to be the likeliest candidate for Homer's Troy. This city dates from around 1700 to 1250 BC, and its citizens lived in dynamic times. To their east, to the east was the wanting, I think it's Hittites, Hittites, Hittite Empire, and to their west, the mighty Mycenaean Greeks. Troy itself occupied a strategic location, commanding the entrance to what is now, I believe that's Dardanelles. Haha. See, I made sure I try to find some of these words this time. Whoever held Troy would control the traffic along the busy commercial route, a fact that would not have escaped the attention of their great Greek rivals, the roots of the war. However, Homer's depiction of Troy revolves around passion, not politics. It begins with a love affair between the Trojan prince Paris and Helen, the wife of Spartan king Menelaus, brother to powerful Agamemnon, leader of the Greek forces. They elope to Troy, triggering war between the nations and the decade-long siege that the Greeks bring to a terrible end with the famous ruse of the wooden horse. In reality, the motives for such a war were probably more pragmatic. Whether or not there was a Helen so beautiful that her face would launch 1,000 ships, the commercial and strategic value of Troy made it a desirable target for any of its neighbors. The citizens of Troy had anticipated outside threats. They had built a defense wall and even dug trenches to stall over war chariots, the assault vehicles of the ancient world. Trouble seemed to have peaked around 1250 BC when the archaeological remains show signs of an attack and a devastating fire. But we cannot tell who the assailants were, if the destruction was caused by a single action or a series of onslaughts over time. Where the certainties of archaeology fade, we can only turn to the ancient poetry for an account of the fall of Troy. And it's here that we find the clever way the Greeks ultimately win the war and turn a proud, impregnable city into smoking ruins. Homer's The Iliad foretells the fall of the city, but stops short of recounting its actual destruction. In its sequel, The Odyssey, the end of the war is mentioned in flashback. Over the centuries, other authors have added to the original tale, but only fragments of their works have survived. These include 2 chapters of I think it's Eleuperus, a text possibly from the 7th century BC, which refers to the ruin of the Doom Citadel. More detailed accounts of the final days of Troy were written centuries later. These include Virgil's Aeneid from around the century BC, and I'm not even going to try that, Posthomerica of Quintus Smyrnus. Written during the 3rd century AD, Quintus begins his story where Homer's Iliad leaves off, the funeral of Hector, the son of Priam and heir to the throne of Troy. According to Quintus, the city seemed doomed after the death of Hector, Troy's greatest warrior. However, some Trojans kept hopes of a victory alive as they awaited the arrival of allies to help lift the siege. The first reinforcements are the Amazon warriors of Queen Penthesilea. Wow, I didn't know that one. But even they cannot hold the furious advance of almost indestructible Greek hero Achilles. One of the most memorable accounts in the epic Trojan cycle is a duel between Achilles and Penthesilea. The Greek hero falls in love with his adversary, and at the very moment he fatally plunges his spear into her side. Oh, Ethiopians follow the Amazon. The Ethiopian mentions by Homer is a distant place of the banks of the mythical Oceanus River, perhaps identifiable with the Nile that had long supplied mercenaries to the Egyptian pharaohs. The Ethiopian army, commanded by King Memnon, now stands as the last line of defense between Achilles and the gates of Troy. The two warriors nobly agreed to decide the battle by single combat. In the hot sun, they dodge mighty blows from each other's spear, then switch to swords, and Achilles at last finds a gap in his rival's armor. With one thrust, he takes Memnon's life. Victory belongs to Achilles, but it is short-lived. The Trojan prince Paris has watched the duel from behind the parapets of the city wall. Just as Achilles is about to storm the city, Paris, guided by the god Apollo, shoots an arrow that strikes Achilles in his one weak spot, his heel. And you guys know, as an infant, his mother held Achilles by the heels as he dipped him in the river Styx, whose waters granted protection everywhere they touched. His heel remained dry and therefore vulnerable to the attack. To the horror of the Greeks, their hero dies. A cunning plan. 10 years of grueling warfare suddenly seemed futile to the assailants. The Greek commander, King Agamemnon, orders retreat. It is at this moment of desolation and defeat that Odysseus steps in with perhaps the most famous ruse de guerre in history. Odysseus has the Greeks construct a huge and hollow wooden horse which hides a small band of brave warriors. The Greek army fakes a retreat, sailing to a nearby island, and leaves the wooden horse on the beach as an offering. Odysseus' plan now hinges on the Trojans taking the gift within Troy's walls. Once inside, the secreted soldiers will crawl out at night, overpower any guards, and open the gates. The Greek army, having returned under cover of the darkness, will storm the city. The plan is risky, and there are no second chances. As dust decedes, the Greeks drag the horses before the city walls and abandon the camp they have occupied for years. That night, the only Greeks left on the beach are those hidden in the wooden horse and a stooge named Sinon. As dawn breaks the following morning, the Trojan sentries see deserted tents, dead animals, and doused fires. They also spot something else, a magnificent wooden horse. King Priam orders the gates to be opened, and for the first time in a decade, the Trojans were able to walk freely outside their city. Many flocked to admire the unusual offering. Oh, it's a trap. Enter Sinon, dramatically throwing himself at the mercy of the Trojans. He spins a story of having deserted the Greek ranks because they had chosen him to be a human sacrifice. Sinon assures his new friends that the horse is a gift to the gods to ensure a safe return journey home. He adds that the horse has special powers, and whoever possesses it will never suffer defeat. Open doors, suspicious mind. After a decade of war, this news falls like rain on parched soil, and the Trojans lap it up. But Laocoon, the priest of Apollo, suspects the trick. When his impassioned pleas are ignored, he hurls his spear against the horse, and snakes surge from the sea to strangle him and his sons. The Trojans interpreted this as Poseidon, god of the sea, punishing Laocoon for sacrilege. Sacrilege is what it is. Such dramatic divine intervention only reinforces the Trojan desire for the offering, and soon the wooden horse is dragged within the walls. So this guy tries to warn them, and then he gets hurt by Poseidon. Even now, the Greek plan can go disastrously wrong, as Helen is also suspicious. She approaches the horse, imitating the voices of Greek wives in an attempt to provoke a reaction from any lovesick warriors within. Inside, Odysseus sees the ruse affecting his men, but keeps them silent, even clapping his hand over the mouth of one. And yet, still the danger of discovery has not passed. Cassandra, Trojan princess, cries out that the horse is a ploy, and that the city will be taken. But the gods seem to remain with the Greeks, for Cassandra has been doomed to never have her prophecies believed. The Trojans celebrate their victory, and as the revelry fades, they take to their beds. The Greeks slip silently from the wooden horse, kill the sentries, and fling open the gates to waiting Greek army. Amid flames and blood, Troy falls and its defenders are slaughtered. King Priam is cut down with the rest of his army. According to the Virgil, only one Trojan warrior escapes, Aeneas. With the burning city behind, he is depicted carrying his elderly father and clutching the hand of his son as they flee to Italy, where he will find a new Troy, the city now known as Rome. Meanwhile, Paris is wounded by a poisoned arrow to which only the nymph Oenone has an antidote. But it was she that Paris had abandoned for Helen, and despite his pleading, she refused and he dies. Ooh. As for Helen herself, when Menelaus raises his sword to deal the killer plows his unfaithful wife, she opens her dress and reveals her body. Captivated once again, Menelaus spares her. A horse is a horse. The tale of Troy teems with memorable characters, but perhaps its most fascinating figure is the one that never speaks, the wooden horse. This has been frequently reimagined in literature, poetry, art, and cinema. Theories about the wooden horse abound. One proposes that it was a poetic representation of the wooden ships on which the Greeks arrived that evolved into a tangible aspect of the myth. Another suggests that a Trojan betrayed the city, sketching a horse on a secret gate as a sign to the Greeks. Others point out that horses were closely linked to the god Poseidon, sometimes known as shaker to the earth. Does the animal represent an earthquake that caused the walls of Troy to fall? Recent scholars have offered more pragmatic theories, including that the wooden horse was actually a siege engine. Such a device can be seen in an Assyrian bas relief from Palace of Assurnasirpal II and Nimrod. This Assyrian horse, I hope I'm saying that right, postdates the destruction of Troy 6 by several centuries, but written material from the archives of Atusa, the capital of Hittites Empire, suggests that siege engines were in use as early as the 18th century. This is a lot of history. The device described as a portable wooden shelter around 26 feet in length and 6 feet wide, from which hung a 7-foot-long pointed stake, like the picture. Beneath the protective shelter, besieging warriors would repeatedly slam the stake against the wall of the city to pry open a gap between the stones and weaken the structure. The Haiti documents refer to the device using animal epithets such as savage, I'm not saying that word, savage A, or one-horned beast. Thus, the Trojan horse can be rationalized as a siege weapon of equine appearance. But even if this is as satisfactory an explanation as we're ever likely to get, many questions remain. Who were the men attacking Troy? And who were the Trojans who fought so desperately and so hopelessly to save it from flames? A little bit of history.